Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, our dear viewers and listeners. Welcome to the next episode of Proc-N-Roll. We are the guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. I am Natasha Gudovich, 26 years of procurement experience. February is my procurement anniversary, Proc-Anniversary. Did I just make up the word? With me is Conrad Smith, who is the Innovator of the Year award last year, awarded and given by me. 30 years of procurement experience from Intel to Adobe CPO, and now a founder and CEO of the coolest and hottest startup, Graphite Connect. And Zach Bashir, our procurement expert of all industries and types of clients. So in our episodes, we are taking the hottest current procurement issues and we are drilling them until we get to the very truth.
Drill, baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill. Exactly. That's the spirit of today's episode. We're talking about orchestration today. Is it the hype or is it a true, exciting customer experience? And with all my years in procurement, I have to tell you that exactly to the date a year ago, I was invited by one of the orchestration companies who asked me to meet with their sales team and share with them how to sell to procurement. And that team asked me a question: how do you understand orchestration? And I said, other than a conductor with a baton who is orchestrating his musician, I never heard this term in terms applied to procurement. They looked at me as if I had two heads, which very possibly was true at that moment. But being in a procurement world for so long, I never heard the word. The concept is not new because we had always been driving towards a smooth process where all steps of the process are connected, where systems are integrated, where disparation between different procurement elements are brought to the minimum. But the term itself had never been applied to procurement world. Did I fall asleep at the wheel for like the last century, or did it really become the new thing and start having a new meaning?
I think it was resurrect. Oh, sorry, Zach. I think it was resurrected, right? Because I implemented Ariba in something like, I don't know, around the year 2000. And right about that time, ServiceNow showed up. And if you remember ServiceNow talking about orchestration, that was their word as well. I think they were like one of the original technologies saying orchestration. And I remember my IT team coming to me, like we were implementing the coolest, sexiest procurement like user experience and technology on the planet. And they were convinced they were going to put a layer on top to make it better than what Ariba was building. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like you're going to layer the entire corporation with this orchestration thing. And like, yeah, so it's been around, but that was from the IT tool. Like that was from ServiceNow, right? Like but other than that, I think it is. It's like the last, what is it, year or two that people are in our space are talking about orchestration again.
It's very welcome, I think, development from my point of view. I always saw it as an evolution of the guided buying concept, which was very popular a couple of years ago, right? And it was all about how do you guide users to the right flows, because the procurement organization can get very complex. And how do you touch more of the spend in the business, right? And automate that in a way that's still user-friendly. So I think an evolution of guided buying is what's taken us to orchestration. And even though, it sounds a bit like a buzzword, to me, it's the right kind of focus on the customer service customer experience, which I really like, which is what this whole orchestration conversation is shining a light on.
So what's the core of it? If you would define, Zach, like what's the core of orchestration? How is it different from the world a couple of years back? What is it bringing to procurement organizations and to enterprises at large that they haven't experienced before?
I think what it is, it's I see it almost as a wrapper around all of your internal procurement processes. So you're dealing with so many different internal systems, and you have different procurement processes that touch multiple systems, and you want to run that process as smoothly as possible, and you don't want neither the user nor the procurement professional to be diving in and out of different tools all the time. So the idea behind orchestration is you can create these really smooth workflows, which just will automate some of that talking between the different tools and applications. That way you don't need to be doing as much anymore, right? So I think it also helps to augment some of the data that you've got, so it can help, organize data in your tech stack a bit better, right? Connect data points, and then you can start to see and analyze different trends in spending in the business because you've got this orchestration layer that in theory is joining everything together. Conrad, what's your view?
Yeah, I think I mentioned the ServiceNow thing before. My view of orchestration is it's a synonym, you kind of touched on it, for everyone saying we need a better user experience. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, the users have just been body slammed with a procurement process that's getting slower, it's getting more complex, and so I hear all the time from companies I talk to that it's actually being escalated to the senior leaders of the company. Like, procurement is broken, it needs to be fixed. And so procurement is now like, well, what do? We got to fix this problem. And like procurement generally does, it's like, let's put technology in here. Let's create a user experience that everyone can be happy with. I mean, separate from this, I'll just tell you that, well, we'll talk about it later too, but it isn't just like you can't put lipstick across procurement and all of a sudden procurement works better. You have to be thinking about it in deeper levels. I think there's these waves of user experience. In the 90s, we used the ERP. If any of you were in the ERP in the 90s, it was a very painful user experience, like even for the pro users like us in procurement, like let alone extending that out to the requester. And then we get these point solutions. So the original like point solutions or best of breed solutions were these 90s version of purchase requisition, purchase order, shopping carts. Like Ariba was the winner coming out of that group of companies. And then as they grew from a point solution to a full suite, and then started looking like an ERP, like this is like, I can't find my way around anymore. I can't use this thing anymore. I'm not that. They became sort of okay across this whole suite of things, and all of a sudden someone comes up and says, I can actually do contracts better, or I can do this better, or I can do that better. So all of a sudden all this tech exploded, and we're now in this wave of, oh my gosh, there's all this tech, we need to bring it back together. And by the way, the user's having a bad experience again, which my argument right now is it's more about speed than it is about, Coupa has a beautiful user experience. Like the new technology isn't horrible, but the process and the experience holistically is not that great. So I think it's a plea from the users to make procurement work better, make it easier, make it faster.
Perfect. And when we think about it's a plea from procurement to make things better, easier, faster, better connected, and all of that. So there are two sides, right? There's preparation and the tool that is being developed, it's technology, right? That's being formed. But there are also some responsibilities, if I want to use that word, that is put on the customers. How do they need to prepare their environment to adopt and integrate this new, more advanced technology into their workflow, into their everyday experience? Because we practical procurement guide, how do we guide our users is that if you are at the phase when you're preparing to the next wave of integrating orchestration technology into your workflow, what do they need to do? How do they prep for that?
I think all the things we've been talking about over these episodes about focus on the outcome and the value and people, process, and technology. Like we've talked about a lot of these things. These are all still very valid. It isn't like, again, this is not a magic wand technology that's going to come in and solve all our problems. A little bit like AI. If we can take just a little like 3-minute sidebar, Gartner's looking at this technology right now, saying that it isn't even at the peak of the hype cycle, right? So if you take a look at the hype cycle, things like generative AI are at the top of the hype cycle. Maybe you can display that image for us. The top of the hype cycle then is generative AI, and still climbing up the hype cycle is these orchestration tools. And I'll confess from conversations I've had with the Gartner analysts on this, that their view of what should be accomplished in orchestration is way bigger than what I see people talking about. But this, by definition, means the technology is early. There's going to be issues, and there's issues, problems, and challenges here. Early adopters will be in this space, but they can expect to run into bumps and bruises. Things are, duct taped together here and there, and that's been my observation as well. I've talked to a lot of organizations that are implementing these early technologies. Simple processes that are orchestrated in work reasonably well, and other things get more complicated. So, just be prepared. Zach, I don't know if you've seen feedback from companies out there, and if they're seeing a similar example.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Conrad. It's not a magic wand, so definitely don't treat it like that. I think definitely start with the process again. You always need to come back to your operating model, and it's like you said, Conrad. You can't just stick lipstick on something and assume it's gonna work, right? You need to do the hard work first to organize your two things. One, organize your processes, your procurement processes, with the lens of making them as simple as possible, right? With that lens of what the customer journey will be and what your internal procurement stakeholders need to do to execute that end-to-end process. So that's one lens, right? And definitely within that lens, focus on those processes that impact your higher spend segments, right? Or your high value segments where you can really make a difference, right? Then there's another more technical or technology lens to this, which is how do you create a flexible sort of solution architecture that you can plug different tools in and out of and still have this orchestration run across that? Because one of the big, I think, benefits of these orchestration tools as they develop will be that you can have this orchestration layer that doesn't need to change, or even this front door from an intake point of view that doesn't need to change for the end user. But you can swap tools in and out along the process. And as you're saying, Conrad, I think it allows you to leverage point solutions, which are great at doing very specific things, much more effectively, because now you don't really need that integration across everything. You just need the orchestration.
I've got to share an experience I had this week. I was out in the Bay Area, and I met with some of my friends over at Google, and I didn't know where they were in their orchestration journey. We were just kind of doing a little discovery, getting to know each other. They have built orchestration. They call it Buyer Hub. They're rolling it all over the world right now. Internal built tool, looks like Google's. I mean, it's a Google look and feel. He said at Google, everything needs to be googly in terms of how it's built out. People like it better that way. But as he described it, and this is, hopefully I don't overstate or understate anything here, but this is he was pretty clear about it, right? Like the user interface layer that they've built insulates the user from everything that's happening behind the scenes in procurement. So if you think about, let's just draw a horizontal line, kind of say, okay, this is that layer. And then underneath that, if orchestration says, hey, I need an NDA, then in the back end, it triggers an NDA process. Call that people, processes, maybe even technology that are back there waiting to catch this. I mean, at the most simple layer, like you can implement a workflow that triggers service tickets, like, hey, this is a service ticket for an NDA, and a pro user on the back end can go say, oh, Zach needs an NDA, and they run over there and they prepare an NDA process and document, and they go do it. And quite frankly, the way he described it is in many of these columns of process, whether it's legal, or whether it's purchase requisitions, or whether it's supplier onboarding or risk and due diligence, like these vertical things that would happen underneath this layer, very swivel chair, very loosely integrated, a lot of human effort in the background, because creating that layer is pretty easy, but full integration to all that stuff underneath is complex. So the user feels like it's a little bit more magic, but in the background, a lot of hand holding to make it work.
So let me ask you a question. With all the tools that exist today on the market, how do procurement professionals make the right choice? And our podcast does not, we do not promote any particular tool or any particular system, but in making a selection between what would work best for my needs and for my company, how do procurement professionals approach that way of thinking that will help them select the right solution?
Can I want to just, maybe this is part of what you're touching on, but if you look at Eloise's spider diagram, it's super scary. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I need an orchestration layer to orchestrate all of that stuff together. I can't even, somehow I need to digest all that. I just kind of ask you another question, which is, if you put yourself in the seat of the business stakeholder and requester, what are the business processes that actually touch them? Because a whole bunch of what we do in procurement, you could argue, okay, I do want you being involved with me in the e-sourcing process, RFPs and stuff like that. Maybe, right? So you could argue that one. Purchase requisitions, maybe contracts, but maybe you would even want to say, I don't actually even want you in there. All spend analytics, market intelligence, EcoVadis, all of these risk tools, which of all of that stuff would you actually say it's important for me to put this in orchestration and give people access to it? I think it's a very small subset of that spider diagram. If you have a Coupa, if you have a Jagger, a GEP, a Reba, something like that, that's going to take care of 90% of what that end user is going to need to be able to interact with. And then you've got a few other supporting processes. Maybe you're not happy how one of those tools does contracts, so you need that one in there as well. Right? So I think it simplifies the landscape of what you need to orchestrate, because I think you're going to spend a lot of extra time and money if you're deciding to also orchestrate all of the pro user tools in the background. The procurement user never has to touch anything else. That's a whole nother place that's generations beyond what I think we're talking about.
So what you're saying, and Zach, correct me if I'm hearing Conrad right, that first, procurement need to determine which tools and solutions are integral for their business continuity. And then on the top of it, they can then choose which orchestration tool to use. Do I hear Conrad right, Zach?
Yeah, I think so. I took away that it's really important to map the touch points, the end user touch points with procurement. And Conrad, I think your point is you need to understand which processes are your customers actually really need to engage with procurement, and then you focus more on those areas. So I completely agree that you should map that customer journey, and you should do that category by category or process by process, right? We identify these areas of higher value.
And then, Natasha, to your point, then that would touch back to, as you're making an orchestration decision, whether you're doing what Google did and build your own, or you're going to buy another one, does that orchestration tool, is it good at stitching together these things I'm trying to stitch together? And frankly, what you'll find is almost every procurement technology has an orchestration capability, because it's not that complicated. The hard stuff is the integrations underneath, but then maybe pick one of after you've picked your basics, then say, does one of these have an orchestration layer that I can leverage? Because that's going to simplify my integration, architecture.
Yeah. So, Zach, I want to follow up with you on maturity of procurement organizations to welcome orchestration. And it may sound that this is only good for big companies, right? For Global Fortune 2000, right? You see clients of all sizes, organizations, and priorities. Is orchestration scalable enough to solve the needs of medium-sized businesses, small businesses, or is there a certain threshold at which this is too much? This is it's kind of like you don't need Ferrari to get to grocery store.
I think in the minds of procurement professionals, there's a story evolving, around the source to pay suite, and are we moving away from that? And so I think there's a lot of interest now in these orchestration tools at every type of organizational maturity. I don't think that if you're a smaller procurement organization or you have a lower spend, that you wouldn't benefit greatly from these tools. But I think you still have to ask yourself the same questions that you would if you were running a very large enterprise, which is, where can you benefit from these tools? What tech stack should I use? Do I have this tech stack available in the business? Like Conrad says, many organizations will already have orchestration type workflow creation tools in the business. And so you don't even need to bring in another tool. Speak to your existing technology suppliers in procurement and understand, do they have a roadmap to launch orchestration type capabilities, and how will that fit in? And I think beneath all that, focus on, never lose sight of the business case. You still need to put a business case together, understand how you're going to really drive return on the investment in this technology, and don't set yourself up for more complexity and challenges down the road. And what I mean by that is, do not ignore data and processes. Keep the processes as simple as possible, right? As clear as possible, with as few touch points, as much automation as you can get in that process as possible. And make sure you're investing in your data. I think this data point we've talked about in other podcasts, and often I see, the right emphasis placed on it, but I don't see the right actions being taken to really address the data in the procurement organization. I think that will also help adoption much better. I do think these tools are scalable as well, Natasha. So if you're starting off with a new tool, you can just connect an orchestration platform to your ERP as opposed to getting a P2P suite, right? Go straight to the ERP and then start to join other tools and applications depending on where you want to drive the most value.
Actually, Zach, that has been my observation as well. In the smaller businesses, they want a tool that does everything for them, honestly. Like, if you think about an enterprise that has this mature tech stack, then it's sort of like, can we put a technology on top of it to simplify it, like ServiceNow across the top? But if you go start talking to a smaller, and I was this morning talking to a smaller organization, they have like 8 different things that in a bigger organization, there would be a point solution or something else. And they're kind of looking, quite frankly, they're looking for a suite that does this, but a suite at an affordable price point, not a crazy Coupa price point, right? And the suite has the flexibility to do all these different kind of things. And the other piece I would say about orchestration, I'm going to go back to what I said. It is a different user experience. If you go into these, let's say the legacy user experience has a lot of tabs and traditional like navigation forms and tables. And if you go through the orchestration workflows, it's usually more of like a wizard. Like, I'm going to ask you some questions, and depending on what you ask, you're going to fill out a field. And I'm going to ask you some more questions, and just kind of, I'm going to wizard you through the process. Like, that seems to be what's behind most of this orchestration user experience, is a very walk you through the process kind of a user experience. It's different, right?
Yeah. I'm excited about AI, and I know we all are, right? But certainly generative AI integrated within these sorts of orchestration platforms, because the whole idea is to automate. And if you can get AI to do some of those automations without you having to do something very technical, right? But if you've organized your process and your data in such a way that it's simple enough for an agent to go and execute certain processes for you, then that'll only increase the value of these orchestration tools longer term.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get very excited about Eloise. Sorry, Natasha. I heard her talk about this exact topic on Tuesday night, and you're gonna love hearing. Like, we're gonna have her on the podcast in a couple of weeks, and she's talking at that exact topic.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to
that. We'll drill her on that in a couple of weeks. Very, very exciting. So coming back to practicality. So you emphasized a lot on customer experience and on the benefits of technology and how they will solve business problems. Can we summarize it? Because one of the probably toughest things that procurement does is to sell the benefits within the company, right? They will need an alignment with the technology, right? With the tech team. They will need alignment and a budget approval from the CFO. They will need approval from legal to implement this, right? When procurement professionals build business case for this next level of technology, what should they emphasize? What will it do to the organization that cannot be done? And I know we sprinkled that through our conversation today, but I want to give our viewers and listeners kind of like a very specific checklist like emphasize on this, this, and this. Like, how will life though for the organization be better with this?
Yeah, as you were talking, Natasha, I just had this sort of vision in my head of procurement team requesting this orchestration tool and having to go through all those approvals, right? And it's very easy to take that entire process, put in a business case, see how painful that was. Like, to get this tool signed off, that's what orchestration is trying to solve, is trying to create the visibility, the speed, as Conrad was talking about. So definitely, I think you need to. I don't think it's hard to really draw on the benefits of orchestration, but you need to be very clear about where these benefits are going to come from and how sure you are that those benefits are going to be realized. In terms of a checklist, like I said, make sure your house is in order first, your data, your processes. Make sure that you understand technically how the solution will fit in with your wider tech stack, not just today, but 5 years from now, right? When new tools emerge eventually, like, you need to have skin in the game and you need to commit for the long run. I don't have a checklist, unfortunately. Maybe Conrad, you've got a few checklist items, maybe?
I was just listening to Natasha thinking I would hate to be in that situation where I'm trying to put together a quantitative ROI to take to the CFO on this, because it's like, well, the engineering is going to, it's going to be one of those where it's like, hey, the business it's going to be better for the business. 30 years now, all the way back to the Ariba days, we're kind of to a place where we've been building self-service into the procurement process. Like, you do it yourself. And behind all of this is, you've got a $300,000 or $400,000 engineer that's trying to handhold something through an awkward process and keep track of it. And there's all these hairballs in the middle, and it's taking, in some ways it's like you're building an ROI to make the engineer more efficient, which is really sad when you think about that from a procurement. We could have a whole podcast about self-service versus, centralized and the impacts of this, but I think it's going to be a little bit tricky. And the organizations that are going to jump into this are the ones that have executives going, I'm just hearing in every meeting frustration with the procurement process. You guys got to go fix it. So I think the quantitative ROI is going to be tricky. Maybe you can argue getting rid of some underlying tools because you build them natively into your orchestration, so you can kind of simplify your architecture. But I think this, like, particularly it's early in the hype cycle, it's going to create more complexity and more cost before it takes it out of the process. Quite honestly, the underlying orchestration in itself is workflow, forms, data, and integrations. And that top layer, like Google has done, like building that layer out, is not the most expensive part. If that was the hardest part, then they would have already built all of these integrations on automation to these underlying pillars of process. But they haven't, because it's really hard and it's expensive. So there's a lot to learn here. And I'm by the way, I'm not discouraging people to go out and invest in orchestration and do these things. This is, early adopters, and those people that, that can lean into this are the ones that are going to help us figure out how to make this work even better. And they're going to create the new suite and the new experience of procurement technology for the future, including things like agents and everything you're talking about, Zach. But yeah, we're still on the semi-bleeding edge of figuring out the new generation of procurement technology.
Yeah. And would you recommend to do a big bang or a phased approach is a good one?
So Natasha, I think we're going to have phase 2 on orchestration here, or, part 2 of orchestration conversation, because we've got that's going to open up like 45 minutes more of conversation. But I would say start thinking about guided intake, like what is the intake to some of my sub-processes? And then how can I stitch together those intake processes? Like, for sure, there is a crawl, walk, run approach here, as long as you have access to some technology to help you do that.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you that it will take longer, and I like how we interacting on this. So those viewers and listeners who've listened to all our previous episodes, they know that the mic in the past emceeing was owned by Zach, and a couple of first episodes by Conrad. And I purposely took it for the last a couple of episodes that are focusing on technology, because you guys do technology kind of like day in, day out. And I want to challenge you with, like, I'm sitting and I'm still representing a true practitioner who every day deals with reality of organizational dysfunctionality as many of the firms represent. So And every time when I'm asking you questions, you're providing me a very good answer, and that triggers the next question. So for sure, it will it commands for another conversation on the subject in more details. And that's great that we're going to have Dr. Eloise Epstein joining us in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. No, let's dive in next recording, and let's go deeper into orchestration, because there's a lot underneath here that's worth talking about and understanding. And I love your practical questions. The ROI one's a great one. That's a real head scratcher. But yeah,
Zach, any practical thoughts specifically about this subject? Like anything that we haven't touched today that you see a lot among your multiple clients?
I think a lot of my clients and organizations are in wait and see mode on orchestration. I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Given how early we are on the hype cycle. And I do think CPOs and procurement professionals and executives' visions need to evolve as to where procurement tech is going to go, right? So have that very clear vision. And it's okay to be working on that right now, because there's a lot going on in the market. So
yeah, fascinating. I think that it's a great privilege and opportunity to see how much technology is evolving. And yet I also see some businesses that haven't even approached to have a PO system in place, right? So the spectrum of companies that we're serving and the spectrum of knowledge that different organizations can derive from our conversation is quite vast. And I think that for as long as we remember touching different levels of maturity, different sizes of organization, and different types of technology that exist, because maybe there is a mid-sized business that would greatly benefit from something that is less advanced and less complex and less sophisticated. So maybe in one of our episodes, we can actually have also kind of like travel a little bit to the back and say that, you know what, there are simpler things that exist today that may actually be of use too. So
no silver bullets.
Yeah. So we'll be touching on all of that. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing us. And we will see you in a week.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.